Okay, let's begin. I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's panel. My name is Bob Wood. I'm the Executive Vice President of AFCEA International, and on behalf of AFCEA International and USNI, I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's panel, where we'll be talking about a question: are we ready to fight and win in a fully contested zone? It builds certainly on what we heard this morning from the service chiefs and their description. Actually, it started even before that. We had a kind of a breakfast meeting this morning with the N8, Admiral Kreitz, and talked about what's been submitted, what's been expected, and we'll see how it all plays out in the PB. But I'm telling you, what you have in front of you now are some very important operators with the experience, but also the responsibility to contest in that zone. We're going to be led in this discussion by a leader you probably all know well. We have Admiral, I want to say Scott Swift, but I'll call him Not So Swift because I just think it's the best name I've ever heard. Admiral Swift certainly was, we know, as the prior commander of U.S. Pacific Fleet. I first met him when he was director of the Navy staff, and in fact, Pete Daly and myself went and visited the director of the Navy staff and talked about this event and where it fit in the dialogue important to the maritime force. Got some great guidance, good support, and really we moved out from there in a way that I think has benefited this audience and these commands in a way that's really added to the combat capability and the readiness of the maritime force. And so it's great to have Admiral Swift as our moderator. He had numerous operational assignments, attack squadron commands, carrier commands, carrier strike group commands, and commander U.S. 7th Fleet, and a variety of staff positions in education, acquisition, operations, in the Navy staff, OSD, and in PACOM, where he was commander 7th Fleet. He's a thinker on the strategic level, and we talked over lunch about some of the things we heard, this morning after the presentation with the service chiefs, and I think he's going to take this discussion in a way that I think you'll find extremely informative, beneficial, and directly on our task of answering the question, are we ready to fight and win in a fully contested zone, with a great supporting cast here to answer that question. Ladies and gentlemen, you got microphones spotted around here. Think of your questions. I can guarantee you they want to hear as much from you as you want to hear from them. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panel.
So thanks for the introduction, Bob. I will say that I do recall that discussion that we had in the office there in the Pentagon, and I was thinking back the last AFCEA West that I came to, and it's extraordinary. I think it was only about 2 years ago. It's extraordinary to walk around the floor today and see all that's going on. It's almost too much. You just can't take it all in as one individual. So what I hope that you were able to take in Admiral Moran's panel this morning that talks specifically about readiness. And what I'd like to do is to separate that discussion from this discussion. Bob already reminded you about what this panel is about. It's about finding and winning in a fully contested zone. But if you look beneath that in the description, it talks about how do we think, plan, and act in a way that will ensure the success, the ability to win, to fight and win and sustain ourselves in that contested zone. And I think the key to that, both the time that I've spent in the Navy and as the year and a half that I've been out of the Navy, the things that I've been doing, I think it's critically important that we think strategically, we plan operationally, and we act tactically. And what I've found is that my experience has been, not just in the military, but in industry and elsewhere, other things that I've done, that we end up thinking tactically, planning tactically, and acting tactically, and wonder why we can't get ahead in the concepts and the application of those concepts. But I'd remind the audience, I'm going to run through introductions here shortly, that we have some strategic thinkers on the panel here. I would invite you to look at your program to read their bios in detail, but I'm going to touch quickly to remind the audience of the unique warfighting experience that's represented on this panel, and the fact that they are living and operating at the operational level. And so that thinking strategic, planning operationally, and acting tactically is in their daily job jar. So the first two questions, I'm going to ask them now and let you think about them as I run through the introductions. And the first one, let's answer the question up front. Are we ready to fight and win in a fully contested zone? And it's a complicated question, it's a complicated problem, and it's a complicated answer. So I'm curious to see how the panelists answer that question based on their own experiences. And the second question is, answer the question about what a fully contested zone. So if you look at Admiral White's world, his perspective of a fully contested zone may be very different than Admiral Fagan's world, and where she has been and leading for some time now. And I'm sure very different from Admiral Sawyer's world as the N3. So with that, let me run through some introductions quickly here. I mentioned Vice Admiral Fagan already. She's the commander of Coast Guard Pacific Area. I didn't have a clue what the Coast Guard Pacific Area was, despite having grown up on the West Coast, both in my childhood here in San Diego and all my Navy career has been on the West Coast, until I was the J3 at PACOM. So her responsibility runs from the Rocky Mountains all the way west to the east coast of the African continent, and from the North Pole to the South Pole. So a significant area to be concerned about across Phase 0 and Phase 2 operations. So she and her forces are engaged on a daily basis. She concurrently serves as the commander of Defense Force West and provides Coast Guard mission support to the Department of Defense and combatant commanders. So she may not be multi-hatted, but there are a lot of hats that she answers to of senior people who think that she works for them. She's served on all 7 continents, so you talk about diversity of experience, from Antarctica to the heart of Africa, and from Tokyo to Geneva. So a great span of experience to bring to the panel this morning. Phil Sawyer was an operational commander, and now he's living the dream of working in the Pentagon. And at least anybody used to be my deputy at PAC Fleet, where I actually ran the fleet. So I'm going to take great pleasure in mercilessly beating him about the head and shoulders throughout the panel today. His first tour in the Pentagon. So if you feel any sympathy for him serving there now, you can go ahead and wipe that out of your thoughts. Career submariner, he served as Task Force 74 and 54, commanding forces both in 7th Fleet and 5th Fleet. Commander Submarine Force Pacific, Deputy Commander of the Pacific Fleet, most recently the Commander of 7th Fleet, and now is the N35 on the OPNAV staff, looking across on behalf of the CNO naval operations around the world. Lieutenant General Osterman comes with us with a wealth of experience. Infantry officers commanded at every level from platoon to a Marine Expeditionary Force. General officer assignments include Assistant Division Commander for both the 1st and 2nd Marine Division, Commanding General 1st Marine Division forward in Afghanistan, Deputy Chief of Staff Operations for ISAF Joint Command in Afghanistan, Commanding General of MARSOC, Deputy Commanding General of SOCOM, and his current assignment is the Commanding General of 1MEF just up the coast here in Camp Pendleton. So every commander that you see up here on the panel has been involved in some form or fashion in combat operations. I would suggest none more than Jody, and he brings a wealth of experience of the direct application in a warfighting environment in Afghanistan and Iraq to the concepts that if you've read the Commandant's planning guidance and the Commandant's intent, brings those lessons into the Pacific theater here. Mentioned TJ. I told TJ that his introduction would probably be the longest here, just because I think it's wicked cool that he served in USS Missouri as an electronics warfare officer and combat information center officer and assistant operations officer as a SWO, and then made the transition to cryptologist. And I think that's extremely important for the cyber warriors that are out there to recognize the experience that they bring as true warfighters. TJ's got a leg up of his experience there in Missouri. He became a cryptological warfare officer in 1992, assigned to Operations Directorate in the National Security Agency, so out of the frying pan and into the fire. Operation Fleet Tours include Assistant Cryptologist, Commander, U.S. Naval Forces Central Command, U.S. Fifth Fleet, Assistant Chief of Staff for Information Operations, N39 and 7th Fleet, commanded the Naval Security Group activity in Bahrain and the Navy Information Operations Center. Flag assignments include Deputy Director of Tailored Access Operations and NSA. He's got a fascinating story. He's going to regale us with that experience here today. Director of Intelligence, J2, U.S. Pacific Command, Commander Cyber National Mission Force, U.S. Cyber Command, and currently commands the U.S. Fleet Cyber Command, U.S. 10th Fleet. Just an example of the kind of experience that we're getting. And to round out this group, Admiral Conn commanded at every level within naval aviation, from the squadron all the way up to the strike group level. He also commanded the Naval Aviation Warfighting Development Center in Fallon, Nevada. Nautic, commanded Carrier Strike Group 4, was a director of air warfare, and then brought that experience of funding readiness to his current assignment of commanding 3rd Fleet, and the responsibility that goes with that, from certifying forces deploying forward as well as commanding forces going forward. So with those introductions, we'll start at the end, TJ, since you're down there, to this question of, are we ready to fight and win in a fully contested zone? And for the audience, we had a quick discussion about the first two questions. Really wasn't interested in a broad discussion. We could spend the whole time we have here answering that question, but just kind of a snapshot view in answering that question from each one of these leaders. So, TJ.
Sir, thank you very much for the very kind words and introduction. I see some friendly faces in the audience, most of them from coalition and partner navies. So everyone else, please just hold your questions till the end. We're ready. It's a pretty direct question. I think it's a pretty short answer. In the cyberspace business, in the space business, which I'm increasingly familiar with, we are in the fight every day. If I was to offer you a fires and maneuver term, I would say that we are danger close and in continuous contact. You can read the headlines as well as I can. I can tell you it's very dynamic, it's very fast-paced. It is sometimes difficult to get to attribution, but that is the expectation. The adversary is swift. We have the capacity and capability to be swifter. I think from a maneuver standpoint and an operational standpoint, we have very good insight because of our partnership with industry and academia, but also across all the services in the intelligence community. I think we are also seeing some progress on the policy front as well. I think that in the last several months, we have seen the expectation for cyber forces, for the DoD, to support and be engaged in something which we call persistent engagement out of U.S. Cyber Command, to be ready, to be present, to be forward, to be postured, to understand what the enemy and the adversary are doing to us, where they are doing it, how they are doing it, and then partnering as appropriate with all sorts of activities below the level of armed conflict to engage. I would say we're still a little uncomfortable talking about it in public, and I think that that's okay for now. There is plenty of oversight, there's plenty of transparency, there's a very rich dialogue that happens within government with the right levels across all branches of government, so I think that we're in pretty solid ground. But we can't afford to be static, however, and I think sometimes we get caught in funding profiles. The ICT industry is not that. It moves faster than any other segment of the DIB. the defense industrial base. It moves faster, plausibly, than any other part of civil society because it is so open. It is an open standard, and everyone subscribes to it. So we in the department, whether it's doing joint or DoD-wide operations or in support of defense support to civil authority, we are subject to a consumer market like no one else is. So from concrete to code, we have to move fast, and that is probably where I would say if we needed to improve a thing, it could be that thing.
Thanks, TJ. Linda?
Thank you, Admiral. So the short answer is yes, but we need to be thinking differently and more dynamically about how our assets are being used across the theater, and in particular when it comes to force packages. And I just think about the deployments that we did this past summer with Berthoff and Stratton. We had UAS, Scan Eagle, on board Stratton, and how we blend that force package and interoperate alongside our Navy peers in a way that is dynamic and different than how the adversary is able to operate. I'd also argue we really need to continue to leverage the interagency process and the other aspects of our government that have resources to bring to bear across the fight. Partnerships, they look different in the Pacific, and there are a number of key partner nations hungry for engagement and interaction with the U.S., with the U.S. Coast Guard. We have a number of peer Coast Guards in the region with Japan, Korea, India, Malaysia, peer Coast Guards and peer navies and self-defense forces who look to partner and engage with some of the authority and expertise that we bring as a Coast Guard force. And then other partners in the region, really at most basic, are looking for just partnership and capacity to enforce and ensure their own sovereignty in their exclusive economic zones. But the short answer is yes, we're ready, but we need to be thinking differently and more dynamically about how we force package and how we position, particularly in the gray zone short of conflict. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Linda. Satan?
Short answer is yes, but I think I need to open up the aperture a little bit because the guidance from my boss, Commander of Pacific Fleet, his first priority is deter our adversaries, or as Admiral Davidson says, win without fighting. And how do I do that aspect of it? Is by certifying and generating forces, combat-capable, lethal, naval, integrated forces that operate forward. And I look at where we are readiness-wise. I'm not going to get into specifics, but I look at the work that Vice Admiral Brown has done for our surface ships, and we're leaving less and less redundancy at the pier. Ships are going out full out. When I look at the work that Vice Admiral Miller has done with the readiness of our aircraft, we're in a much better place. Now, truth be told, we should be because a lot of resources have been applied to it. But we're seeing those results in terms of combat-capable, lethal naval forces going forward. The other priority is assure our allies, partners, and friends that we stand together. If you look at the Pacific, it's a big place. From Hawaii to Manila is like flying from New York to LA and back to New York. That's a lot of sea space. And it's going to be working with our coalition, our allies, our partners and friends. They're going to play a big part in that. And it's also about we can surge all our forces, but we can't surge trust. And we have various exercises. Some are live, virtual, constructive, or synthetic, that we work with our coalition partners so that we understand each other. We understand the capability they can bring to bear, and we're generating that trust out of every one of them. And the last one is if called upon, fight and win. That's what the American people expect us to do as part of the joint force. You know, I look back to my days at Nautic and some of the training environments that we were able to create there, simulation environments where you had young, trained, disciplined surface warfare officers talking with young, trained, disciplined naval aviators. You put those people in the right environment that's at a high-end level, and they start having conversations that I never had as a junior officer. I'm a firm believer from young minds come fresh ideas, and when you take those young, trained, disciplined warriors, you put them in that environment, they come up with ideas men and women over 40 aren't going to think of. And we're about 5, 6 years into this. So from a fight and win perspective at the tactical level, we are much better than we used to be. room to grow, more work to do, but we got some fantastic lieutenants and JGs out there that are doing some good work. I think from a, getting back to the Pacific, and that geography matters in a fully contested environment. We'll get into the definition here shortly, but I guess my view would be when in a multi-domain environment where ordnance is coming from us in a multi-domain manner and potentially ordnance coming at us from a multi-domain perspective, that would be my definition of a contested environment. Perspective sometimes is where you sit or where you've sat. But to answer the question, yes, we are ready to fight and win tonight.
Thanks, Satan. Phil?
Yeah, thanks. I do think the very short answer to this is yes, we are ready to fight and win. And as the other speakers have kind of articulated, it's manning, training, equipping, and our concepts for how we'll go to how we will go to fight. The important part, and again, it's been alluded to, is there's a temporal aspect to this. We are ready now, but the other guys are continuing to try to erode away at our advantage. And it's imperative on us and actually many of the folks out there that we continually stay ahead of that, both qualitatively and to as much as possible a quantitative standpoint. And so the CNO put out in his FRAGO his three main tenets of warfighting, warfighters, and future fleet. And I think if you look at all three of those and take them in totality, it shows that we are on the right path in support of the National Defense Strategy, and it shows all the pieces and parts that are required to make sure that we're following the North Star, the goalpost that is the National Defense Strategy, and we stay ahead. The last part that I would add, and it's part of the warfighters aspect of it, is the part about making sure that our people not only are taken care of, critically important to the commanders, but also are absolutely best prepared to go do whatever it is our nation's going to ask us to do. And I think that there's a training part of that, clearly, but there's also an education part of that. And I think we are just now seeing that we're taking on the education portion of that. Thank you.
Jody?
Okay, sir. First off, I'd like to amend my bio as that I have never served in the Pentagon. So Phil took one for the team here on this last go-around. But the answer for me is yes, ready to fight and win also, without a doubt. You know, the last 18 to 20 years, essentially the Marine Corps has become a second land army because our nation asked us to do that. So fighting alongside the U.S. Army and very terrestrial based in terms of our Afghanistan and Iraq mission sets. I have to point out that we have transitioned from that. We are now back to our expeditionary roots, which allows us to get after the near-peer fight that the defense planning guidance has talked towards. So, you know, instead of being, a second land army that can also go on ships, we're now a naval force that can go ashore when required. And so a very distinct difference in mindset and the way that that's all come about. That's been further refined with the Commandant's planning guidance. For anybody that hasn't read that, that is our way forward, and it's what's going to refine our ability to not only currently win and fight, but also in the future to maintain the decisive edge. Because as Admiral Sawyer mentioned, the enemy gets a vote. They get a chance to get better, and we've got to stay that much better than they are. So with force design changes associated with that, naval integration, for me personally, it's working with Admiral Conn and 3rd Fleet to be tied at the hip on no longer the operational forces of the Marine Corps, but the Fleet Marine Forces, back to our old nomenclature, which defines us as soldiers from the sea, which is exactly what we are in terms of the naval integration aspect. I would say in terms of the readiness to fight and win there, oriented on the multi-domain fight that we'll probably talk about a little bit later. And most importantly, as an expeditionary force, being able to fight and win inside the enemy's weapon engagement zone. So we fully expect to be within the range of those weapons that the enemy may bring to bear, but being able to be that contact layer in order to allow the surge activity that's required, but long and short of it is to win that complex fight. So back to being our crisis response expeditionary force is capable of responding immediately against the nation's adversaries.
So a couple thoughts run through my mind. One is to Jody's point of Fleet Marine Force. I was fortunate enough when I was at the PAC Fleet Commander to serve with some pretty incredible